Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar and I am your host. Thanks for tuning in. Today's episode is with Ken Foster of First Data, and he's the head of global cyber risk for First Data, and we're going to have a very, very interesting conversation. I want to thank you for tuning into our podcast today. We're going to get started with Ken here in just a second. Quick note, though, we love our listeners, and we're loving the feedback that we're getting back from you guys. So follow us, please, on LinkedIn and Facebook under CyberHub Engage, and on Twitter, CyberHub Engage as well. We appreciate the support. And so we're going to be right back with Ken Foster of First Data. Thanks for tuning in. Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar, and we are in the studio today with Mr. Ken Foster, who's the head of global cyber risk governance at First Data. Hey Ken, how's it going?
Doing well. How you doing?
Living the dream, man. How about yourself?
Same.
All right, so just to kind of introduce Ken, he's a U.S. Navy vet. So we just spent about half an hour here shooting the shit about Afghanistan. But over 20 years experience in the information technology profession, served as a CISO and a consultant, worked on a mirage of projects. Very impressive. And I'm happy to have him here today. Ken, welcome.
Thank you.
Anything I'm missing about you?
No, this is, I guess, the one thing I guess to say about this is I've been doing this for a long time, and it's always been a passion of mine. I got into this early on back when I was in the Navy before they actually had before the term cybersecurity got created. My first role was actually an information assurance officer for the command. So back when we still called it information assurance. So I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen a wide array of different verticals and different size companies and different types of environments. So it kind of gives me a little bit more of, a unique perspective on where security has grown up over the few years and where we're still missing the target on a lot of things. So
we've been doing this podcast for some time, and obviously there's a lot of different things that are missing in cyber, right? There's a lot of different challenges that are out there today. You obviously work for a very big company that has a budget and has the duty because of, I like to call them cyber regulation, compliance cyber regulation, to have some sort of protection in place. But do you find that carries the discussion, or is it more compliance, or is it now after, Equifax and Home Depot and Target and all the big stuff that it's more of we don't want to be a headline?
Well, there's a lot of that. I think Equifax woke a lot of people up in cyber, in the business side as well. Even though some CEOs have been fired for other large breaches, this is the first time one's been set in front of Congress and been grilled. So there's a lot of CEOs out there now go, oh, I actually have some culpability in this, and I need to be responsible. Because nobody wants to be the next guy setting up there going, well, we narrowed it down to this one guy who didn't do his job, which we all know is really not true. Right. That was a cop-out and tried to scapegoat his way out of there, but that made him look a little foolish, I think, to the world.
To the people who know what they're doing, right? Because it's not just one guy who didn't patch it, right? It's blaming a plane crash on a pilot, right? Yeah. It's a series of events that leads a plane to come down. And it's the same thing in cyber, right? There's a chain of events that happen, and that chain of events leads to a disaster.
Right. So I think that in one way woke up a lot of the business executives that now say, oh, we probably should put some funding into this that we may have in the past said we didn't want to. And I think the one thing that has come out of that now is you're starting to have a lot of senior security people, whether they're CISOs or just the senior guys out there. You're seeing the conversation change from we need to put this widget in, or we need to take care of this patching. We need to understand what we need to do now as senior leaders. We need to figure out how to look at the business risk, understand what the risk is to the business, understand what the impact is to the business, and be able to translate what we are trying to do from a capability, from cybersecurity capabilities, to guide them and guide the overall program and say, this is a capability we want to have. Let's just use encryption as an easy one. We want to block level encrypt everything, right? And this is a capability we want to have. This is why it's important, because if we are Equifax and we have all this data and it's sitting out there block level encrypted but not field level encrypted. So block level encryption, when you look at the technical side of it, you go, well, block level just keeps somebody from stealing my hard drive and getting this data off here. Doesn't stop you from electronically taking the data.
Right.
Because if you got in through the application, it's decrypted. So they would get that, so what you want to do is go, well, because the first question a business owner is going to go, well, we did this encryption project 5 years ago because PCI says it needs to be encrypted. So we encrypted it. Well, you block level encrypted it because that's all PCI requires to this day is block level. What we really need is field level. And now you need to explain why we need to have field level capability, and you need to explain why that is a risk to the business, and say Equifax is a good example of why field level encryption is an absolute must if you have this kind of sensitive data, right? Because now you can say, I need to be able to keep this data from being exfiltrated to my backup system and then exfiltrated out of my environment because it was broken up into small chunks and it was unencrypted, and they were able just to siphon the data right off of our environment without us ever knowing it, because more than likely it was hidden inside a business process to look normal, and they were able to exfiltrate data. And because you gotta start helping understand why you want this capability and what the impact to the business is, and explain it in a way that they understand it, which is risk. Right. You don't want to go to a board or a CEO, and even some CIOs. You don't want to go to them and go, well, I need this because of this widget, because this is happening, and this type of encryption and this bit level. Because you're going to look at you with glassy eyes and go, I don't know what you just said.
Right.
But it sounds important. Right, but you still need to be able to
explain. No business case for it.
No business case. And then the other thing you need to be able to do is prioritize. Everybody's going to walk into any environment as a new leader, as a new CISO, or even CISOs today, and they walk in and they go, wow, there's 150 things that we need to get done. Right? These are 150 projects that we have to do. The worst mistake you can make as a CISO or as a senior leader is to try to do all 150. Right, so what you've got to do is look at this and go, there's probably 5 to 7. They're really critical, and this is why they're critical based on a risk profile. You've got to do a risk assessment. You've got to come up with a risk profile. You've got to understand what should be a priority and why this should be a priority based on the impact it has to the business. And every business is going to be different, right? You can't come in there and go, these should be our priority because this is First Data's priority, or this is, I was the CISO at Rollins for a while, or this is a completely different priority list, right, of what we should be protecting. So you've got to look at that and go, what are the absolute most important things to my business, and not my security business, my business, the company. How we make money.
That's a common misunderstanding with a lot of CISOs, because some of them are not business oriented. That's a challenge that
I think we're starting to see the shift in that role. Whereas traditionally we've had really good technical guys who've made it up to the CISO roles, and now we're starting to see that shift to where they understand the really sharp guys that I know out in the community. They're all shifting to we need to understand the business
side.
We need to spend time with the business. We've got to sit down and interview the business people and go, what is important to you? You need to sit down with business people and go, tell me what your worst day is. In your mind, what would be your worst day? And you may look at one business and go, well, you do a lot of credit card transactions, so losing all that data may be your worst day. But you may go to somewhere in Latin America and everything's done in cash.
Right.
And they go, well, we do everything in cash, so the phone line's going down because it all, they call in, and then they come in and do a cash process. So the system not being available for them to process that they've intake this cash is more important than the data because it's a cash business. So
Right.
you've got to look.
It's a pen and paper business.
It's a pen and paper business, right? So you need to understand your audience, right? And I think we struggle a lot of times when guys get new into this role. And, there's a lot of first-time CISOs and senior leaders out there moving.
Well, it's a role that's just now starting. Right. Most companies go, all right, we need the CIO can't be the CISO as well. We need to have a CISO as well.
And what you're seeing is really talented individual contributors who are really good at what they do, right? They were a good individual contributor. They were a super technical guy, a super smart guy, maybe a good manager and leader of a team already, and now they're getting promoted into a strategic position. And that's the thing. That's the other shift you've got to get. You've got to understand the business, and you've got to understand how to align your strategy from cybersecurity capabilities to the business strategy. Right, so you can't just come in and go, there will be tactical things you're going to have to do because you go, oh my God, right. We've got to stop this bleeding right now. So wrap that up. So you're going to have those tactical things, but in reality, you've got to start looking that strategic plan and make sure your strategic plan matches what the business's strategic plan is. So you need to understand where the business is going to go and say, we want to start processing credit cards mobily within the next 18 months. Okay, is my program set up in a way that I can have the capability to protect that mobile credit card transaction in 18 months? So you've got to shift your thinking to that.
Right.
And
do you feel like that's all the shifting is catching up with the threats and the how? I don't want to say hackers because it's
it's more than hackers.
It's more than hackers, obviously. But do you feel like this shift is helping catch up? Because
I don't think we'll ever catch up. One, because it's very difficult for us to be as fluid as an organization as. And again, I don't like the word hacker either, but as a I guess is whatever your threat is, whether it's a group, whether it's a nation state, whether it's Bob sitting down in accounting, right? You need to understand where your threats are. Again, you have to understand what the business is, because if you do not understand where your risk lies, 90% of the companies never have to worry about nation state, right? Not going to come after them. But certain industries, they absolutely have to worry after.
And they go after every single company.
And they go after every single company, right? And then, in the fintech area, you've got to understand that there are groups of malicious people out there who run it like a business, who work a 8 to 5 shift and have help desk and everything else that are coming in and attacking you constantly, but they are hyper-focused on your vertical. Right, so you need to understand where that threat's coming from,
and what data they're going after,
and where that data lives. And this goes back to something I think I've had some conversations here lately on, and innovation's been a big buzzword here lately, right? How are you being innovative? Well, the problem with innovation is there's a lot of new cool technologies out there, a lot of new cool toys. Everybody wants to play with it, but we as an industry tend to skip some of the basic stuff we should be doing. And you'll hear everybody, I've said it myself, and it's that cyber hygiene word, right?
Right.
Do I have a good inventory? Do I understand what lives on my network? Do I have a way to track it? Do I do my patching regularly? Do I do system updates regularly? Do I understand where my ingress and egress points are? Do I know where my data lives? Do I have it classified? Do I have it marked? Do I have it tagged? Do I know whether, nowadays, do I know whether it should be in the United States or should be in EMEA or should be only in Germany? So I need to understand a lot more about my data than I ever have. Right. Used to back in the day, we didn't care where the data lived. We just wanted to put our endpoint on, and we wanted to put our DLP on, and we wanted to
security was endpoint. Yeah. For a long time.
Endpoint and server forever, right? And we no longer have a border. The border's been gone forever, because everything, the data needs to become the border, right?
Right.
And
the data lives everywhere.
Data lives everywhere, and then we need to be able to control our identities. right? And that's the other issue, right? So identity is another place where we tend to fall down a lot because it's hard. Not because the concepts behind it are hard. It's because most of us are not in a greenfield, brand new environment, and we're paying for sins of the past.
Right.
So in figuring out how to clean that up, because nobody wants to go, I need to spend $2 million to go in and clean up Active Directory. Nobody wants to try to justify that. But in reality, that's probably where you should start, and probably making sure that you have a really good CMDB and a really good IP management system. So I know everything that lives on my network. I know everybody who's accessing my network. I know what their normal patterns are. And we're seeing that now with user behavioral analytics, right? So we're starting to see that it started, I guess, really became the kind of hot thing.
Last year?
Well, it started about 3 years ago, and it's really gotten hot in the last year, though.
Well, user behavior analytics have what I like to call a fail mechanism to begin with. Right? Because if you're a company with turnover, your user behavior analytics don't dictate 10 or 15% of your staff that's turning over.
And the problem is a lot of these companies that are out there pitching this are telling you, oh, it's AI. Well, no, it's not AI. It's just machine learning.
Right.
They're just looking at patterns, collecting enough data, and coming up with.
And there's a difference between machine learning and AI, and most people don't know the difference. They kind of group them together, and you're like, that's insulting artificial.
Yeah, it's completely different, right?
Yeah.
And I've yet to see a true AI in our security world. Any product that's been pitched to me, that it's a true AI.
Curious question: how many products do you get pitched a month?
Oh, it's ridiculous. And it's funny. I get pitched products we already own and are using. I mean, it's do a little research, people. And again, that just goes back to this whole. Everybody wants to sell you what the latest and greatest toy is, and what you really should do is back up and look at your overall program efficacy and go, have I done the basics? Have I set a good baseline, a good, just call it cyber hygiene because there's no better way to say it. Do I have the relationship with my infrastructure teams, with my IT engineering teams, to help them understand why it is so critical that we keep patching up to date? Why when a new threat comes out that we know we're exposed to, take any of the major ones that have come out there, Heartbleed, Apache Struts. Right. Great example, especially here locally, right?
Right.
Everybody knew that was a bad thing. Why was that not? And it's facing the internet, and it's facing the world. Why was that not taken care of immediately? Well, and we all know, and I'm not laying blame. We all know that when you look at that, maybe somebody did a risk assessment on it and went, well, we think we have enough layers in front of that to keep that from being an issue for us. But therein lies the problem. We think we have enough layers.
Well, the key word there is we think.
Yeah.
Right? When you don't really, when you don't really understand what's going on, when you don't really, it's like a game of chess, right? You feel like you have, 3 layers ahead of something or whatever, and eventually it just...
But again, testing, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the other area where we really, really need to focus is getting involved with our development teams, whether internal, external, vendors, whatever, and truly working to build secure development lifecycle, right? Understand that we have got to test this stuff. We have got to red team it. We have got to pen test it. We've got to vulnerability. And, hire you some people who know what they're doing from an attack side who can test your environment and test it. Yeah, it may delay a new product, a new feature, a couple of weeks. Most of the time, that's probably the longest it's going to delay it. You may run across something that's just coded so bad occasionally that it's going to delay it forever. But you've got to work with these guys and help them understand. If you do this now, yes, it delays it 2 weeks, but guess what? Probably saves us a lot of money and a lot of time down the road when we find it in production and have to go back and refactor the code and redo it then. right? And I've read enough studies, looked enough things. They say it's average 3 times longer and about 3 times the cost to fix it after it's in production than to fix it during the development stages.
And it's a threat.
And it's a threat, right? And if you're not training your development teams, whether they're onshore, offshore, wherever, and not getting them to understand that it is critically important that they think, how would somebody attack this?
Can you outsource security though?
You can't. Not really. I mean, you can outsource pieces of it. And the old saying goes, you can outsource whatever, you just can't outsource responsibility, right?
Right.
And you're still responsible for it. So, and go back to that old military term we've all heard, trust but verify, right? It's because, you can trust somebody to do something, but you better verify it. And you better understand. The problem is, again, I think the big thing is the business puts a lot of pressure on development teams to deliver features.
Right.
To deliver the next greatest thing that's going to attract more revenue and it's revenue. Let's just call it revenue, right? Whatever is going to generate revenue. Now, they're going to tell you it's worth millions of dollars. They have really no idea because they don't know whether anybody's going to adopt it or not. But you've got to base it off from a security side. You got to look at it and go, it's possible that it's going to be worth that value. So we need to figure out how we use our capability or add a capability to cover that cost. And that's how you justify it, right? You go,
right.
They're saying it has the potential to make X amount of money. So when I lay out my plan to fix that or protect that, I should be able to say, well, I'm going to use X percent of that cost as my budget for how we're going to protect this and go forward. And that's how you got to sell it, right? So when you go up to the boards, you got to tell them, you got to answer 3 simple questions. How much, why they care, how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take?
Right.
And then sometimes there's a 4th question they follow up with is, we're good once this is all taken care of, right? It's never going to happen, right? So then you have to be ready to answer the no, we're never good.
Because board education is a big deal now, right? Most boards want to know more about cyber, don't quite comprehend the business aspect of it, don't quite comprehend the fact that you can never be at 100% security because there's no such thing as 100% security, like there's no such thing as a 100% no car accident.
Well, right, and it's one of the hats you wear, right? Your teacher, your guide, your protector, your technologist, you're a strategist. You've got a lot of hats you've got to wear, and you've got to be able to talk to people in a language that they understand. Again, you can walk into any room full of people and start spouting off of latest and greatest buzzwords and acronyms and all the things out there, and nobody's going to understand what you're talking about. But if you understand the audience that you're talking to and can translate what you're trying to present down to what they understand. Again, it's business risk. All business leaders understand risk. So you talk risk, right? If you're moving over to the IT side of the house and start talking technology, you can get a little more technical with that side of the house, right? If you're talking to your salespeople and you got to relate it to them personally and go, hey, I'm protecting your phone because it's got corporate data on it. But think about, because let's say it's a BYOD device, I want you to be cognizant of what you're doing with that. We want to protect corporate data, but what about your credit card data that I guarantee your Apple Pay or whatever you've got stored on this phone? What happens if someone steals your phone? Right? Or what happens if somebody hacks into your phone? Now they've got direct access to your bank account, right? Who cares about what they're going to do to the corporate data? They got access to your bank account. Don't you want to protect that? So it's finding out how to relate it to that person and be able to get them to understand why it's important.
Those in the industry, we live in I like to call it the constant state of paranoia, right? Trust but verify always. But an average person who's not goes, this is too much.
Yes.
Right? What kind of things do you do to not overwhelm, because people are the reason for breaches most of the time.
Yes.
It's a human error. It doesn't matter how much technology, doesn't matter how many layers, unless, you take humans out of the equation.
Like I said, Bob down in accounting is the most dangerous thing you will deal with.
Right.
And not because Bob necessarily is malicious, but because Bob doesn't know any better.
Right.
That's why phishing is so successful. It's why it's probably the number one attack vector out there.
Right.
I think the last time I looked, it is probably the number one attack vector out there. Because it's easy. It's low cost, and it's high success rate. Because no matter how much you train someone, they're still going to click on it. I remember doing a phishing exercise one time, entire enterprise. Didn't tell anybody purposely, not even my own security team. Had it kicked off. Within 30 minutes, one of the guys on the team realized we were getting hit by a major phishing attack. He started putting the wheels in motion to get it shut down, block it. Had help desk send out an email telling people to not click on it. It's a phishing. We still had 30% click-through rate after
the email
went out telling people not to click on it because it was phishing.
How many people don't open the help desk email? What's the read?
I didn't have
what's
that, but I will
that?
guarantee you that's probably greater than 20%. Even if it's got a big flashing light on it that says read this now, I would say you're probably at least a 20%, and it may be higher, but I'm being generous in saying it's at least 20%.
I was at a conference in Israel at the beginning of this year, and heard a General Petraeus and a gentleman by the name of Nadav Tzafrir, who used to be the CISO, the head of 8200 for the IDF. And they were talking about Stuxnet, and Nadav now runs a company called Team 8, and they're a cybersecurity kind of venture fund.
I've heard of Team 8. Yeah.
Right. And he was talking about the conversations he has with CISOs. And one of the things he said is we look now to invest in technology in cyber that increases productivity in a business rather than slow it down.
Yes.
Are you starting to see stuff like that pop up, or is Nadav just the one of few that are talking that way? Because I feel like security, like what you just said now, right? Help desk has to send an email that you hope people open, that you hope brings them to an attention to not open an email that they got before it.
Right. Well, and I'll throw it even back on one other thing. It's I've made this comment many times. We've put so many agents on the end user's computer. It's as safe as it can be because it has no more processing power to run any malicious code because it's running so many agents, right? So you're right. We've got to figure out a way to make it invisible, right? The user does not need to know on a daily basis what we're protecting them against.
Right.
That's, I guess,
That'd be like the FBI saying, hey, today we arrested 15 people who tried to blow up something.
Right.
Every day,
right? So, and that's another problem, right? And phishing's a good example. It's like every day we're seeing this phishing stuff, right? There's some new technologies that are coming out there now that at least if you own multiple products, they have the ability to identify once it's been identified as phishing, even if it's somebody who just clicked on it and said it's phishing, it has the ability to search all of the email in the corporate and pull it back out of the box before anybody else. So you see at least there's some of that starting to be a little more proactive.
But that's identifying the fact that it's a phishing email.
Right. That's based on it being identified.
Right.
Which is still very tough.
And what's the success rate on some of that stuff? Have you seen it?
It's pretty new. So I haven't seen the full. We actually have it. It just isn't. I haven't seen it in full play yet because literally, it's just getting released. We just so happen to have the two products that tie together to do that. I think one of it is constant reinforcement and instantaneous reinforcement with the training. If you're doing a phishing exercise and you get people clicking through and being able to let them know right then and there, hey, this was phishing. This is why. Go look at this short, consumable snippet that doesn't get technical. These are the things that should have clued you off, right? You should have probably at least looked up at the header and seen that it come from, Bob Smith at the corporate name, or the corporate name had an at symbol in it instead of an A, or you've got to look for that. I've seen them come in and all they did was add an extra I to right next to an I, so they miss some of that stuff. It's hard to detect. I think
because people work at a fast pace, right?
Yeah.
And security's not. If I'm a sales guy, or you're in marketing, or you're in HR, you don't really care for that.
And that's why, again, I think it's relating it to them and helping them understand why. Because a sales guy, not to beat up on sales guys, but sales guys for the most part going, what I do doesn't really matter, right? They're not coming after what's on my laptop, because I don't keep nothing on my laptop. It's public information, right? What they don't understand is how to make the jump from
Their laptop.
the laptop is now the entry point. The next time you come into the network and plug in, that's going to leave your laptop and get onto the network and then start wreaking havoc there. So it's very, very difficult to get people to understand that, because they don't care. And I've talked about this a lot in my past, and it's probably been almost five years ago since I read this article. There was a study done that said, basically they went out and said, if I give you X amount of money to sell your credentials and access to the corporate network, would you? It was kind of the basis of it. And the results were, is anybody who makes under, I think at the time, it was anybody who made under $70,000 a year, that they would sell their access to the environment for less than $5,000. And it was like 60% of those people making would sell their access for $5,000.
I'm curious, the person who did that study,
Yeah.
what was the motive behind it?
Well, I mean, insider threat, and I don't think it's malicious insider threat as much as it is unintentional insider threat.
But there is malicious insider threats.
There is malicious, and I think it's higher depending on the vertical you're in. There are certain verticals I think it's much higher for malicious but I still think our greatest concern is the unintentional malicious insider, which is the phishing guy.
Which is Bob in accounting.
Bob in accounting, or the receptionist. Think about it.
Yeah.
If you're wanting to social engineer your way into a company, who's the best person for you to call? Receptionist. She's by nature helpful, wants to be helpful, wants to be polite, wants to give you a good impression of the company that you've called. And if you're good at talking to people in that social engineering way, she's going to give you a lot of information that's going to help you.
She's going to let you know that, Josh is out on vacation for the next 2 weeks.
Right.
Barbara's replacing Josh, and Barbara's so busy and overwhelmed, that you should probably shoot her an email. And by the way, here's Barbara's email.
Right. Or here's Barbara's phone. You should reach out to her, because if this is that important, or the CFO's traveling, and this is why you see the wailing emails that come in asking for money to be transferred. That still amazes me how much that happens today. And these are C-level people that transfer. I mean, you would think in today's day and age that they had heard that enough going, unless me and you've had a conversation that says you should wire $30 million to this other account.
In the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, right.
It's not like you're wiring accounts to, Cincinnati.
Right. It's like, you've never done this before. Why are we doing it this way? And it goes, and why does it always happen when I'm out of town? Right?
Well, I think that's the work relationship piece that we missed. The human factor element in cybersecurity is always the one that is underestimated, right? Yep. It's the one where the person's relationship with their boss. If right before he left, you screwed up, and now he's gone, and you get an email from your boss that says, "Hey, do this," you're not likely to question it, because you just want to do what he's telling you to do, because you just don't want to get fired.
And I think that's where
that's culture.
I think in culture is I think where we really need to focus some of our energy is becoming that culture change agent from a senior leader. Right? Used to it was, and I would have told you this 5 years ago, it's not my job to help shape corporate culture.
Right.
In reality, now
it is.
It is. It really is my job to help shape corporate culture. and to evangelize why we should be doing this stuff.
Do you find that when you talk security with different people within the company now, after Equifax, after all the big stuff that goes on, do you find that to be a little bit more receptive?
Yeah, you actually get people coming up to you asking questions now,
Okay.
right? Or, I mean,
So there's some positive
there's
effects.
definitely some positive effects. You're definitely seeing people now more engaged, more interested that want to ask questions. Now, half the time you have a conversation with them. I'll never forget this one time. I sent an email out about a phishing campaign that had been going on, and looked really good too. It was looked a lot like an iTunes order, and I mean it was pretty good. If you dug into it, you could see it was an extra name in the Apple in the iTunes email address, and they had misspelled password. When you clicked on it to actually start to log in, they had actually misspelled password. But other than that, it looked really good. And I kind of sent out this blast email internally as just a training thing to say, hey, this is the things that could happen, and think about this. This is connected to, and this is my Apple, my only. Apple's great about letting you sync all your stuff up and keeping all your information for you and helping you log in, but you lose your phone and they get into it, they now have you everything because it's all linked. So I kind of went through that with the little training thing I put together. And the chief marketing officer stopped me in the parking lot on my way out of the building that day. He goes, man, he said, I really appreciate you sending that out. He said, I never really thought about that way. He said, and also you scared the crap out of me. He said, that is, I never thought of it. And he said, it scares me to death now. And I said, well, that's good. Actually, I'm glad you're scared, because if you're scared, you're at least paying attention.
Right.
But what you don't want to do is spread fear. You know, our old FUD friend, right? Fear, uncertainty, doubt is not the way you want to sell this. But you do want to understand, you do want people to understand there's repercussions for not doing this. And there is danger, not to just the corporate side of it. More than likely, if they've gotten your phone, because whether it's a BYOD, whether it's something the company has given you, you have personal information on that phone. And you go to your bank. You go to your doctor's office. You look at that stuff on your phone. They can collect all that.
Are you starting to see more threats attacking people's phones rather than computers?
Yeah, I think mobile. I mean, we've been seeing it for a while, but it's definitely, there's a big uptick in that. And you know, no matter how secure Apple says their stuff is, it's not uncrackable.
Well, it's I would say you're only as secure as the place where it comes from, right? You don't it's not like there's someone at the Foxconn factory in China looking over every single part. Most chips come from Malaysia. It's now been proven that Malaysia chips have been compromised and infected with malware at the point of origin, which is undetectable by anything of that nature.
Why do you think NIST and some of the regulatory environments now, depending on what your industry is they're very, very concerned on you having a counterfeit detection program in for counterfeit hardware, right?
Yeah.
How many of you have ever bought something off of Amazon and got a counterfeit? I mean, Amazon can't stop it. Today, when you buy something offline, there's a high chance it's a counterfeit.
Right.
Right? And to most people, they're never going to notice it, right? There's a lot of Fokias out there, as we used to call them. It's a knockoff Nokia, and it looks like a Nokia, but it's not a Nokia. Right. Yeah.
A few last questions here, because I know we're getting short on time here. What's your favorite breach? What breach were you really impressed with from the attack side? That you were like, wow, this was very sophisticated. Do you have one of those?
I won't call it favorites. I think the OPM breach was an interesting one.
Right.
And being that I think every one of us sitting in this room were part of that breach.
Right.
And we're just now starting to see the first actual fraud from that breach. I still think the target breach for the Vector was an interesting way to get in. Now it's common knowledge that they're using third parties to come in, but I think using the HVAC system was a unique vector that probably a lot of people up to that point hadn't really thought about.
Well, the third-party vendor, and this is going to be our last question, and we'll wrap up with this, but the third-party vendor is really the second biggest human threat to a company. We saw that with the 24/7 AI breach that just happened a few months ago with Delta and Sears and Kmart. Third-party web chat that's supposed to, increase your sales, speaks to the CMO, the CEO, speaks to everyone like, you don't even need people. Right. This does it all by itself. Right? And you get so excited, and then your customers give credit card information to that specific service, and that service is not secured.
Yep.
What are you doing to address third-party vendors?
So it's a program, right? That is a program into itself. It can't be something that you part-time spend some effort on. And it's not just the security side of the house that has to be involved in that. You got to vet those third parties. You've got to you can't have a generic questionnaire that you just send out and play the questionnaire shuffle game. Right.
Do you feel like it needs to be more than a questionnaire? Do you feel like you need to do a penetration test on their system and stuff like that?
Depending on what you're doing and what the data is, I actually do think all of us put in our contracts that we have the right to audit and penetration test you. Do it. I mean, that's
right.
I've worked for a lot of places that language was in there, and very, very few of them have actually ever followed up with that we're going to come do a random audit of you. Or we want to come see.
Well, it costs money to do that.
It costs money. But, and then not only third party, what about fourth and fifth party?
Right.
Make sure that you understand that when you hired company A to do this process for you,
they're not subcontracting.
That they haven't subcontracted it out, because there's a very good chance they have. And it's not a showstopper if they do, but you better understand everywhere your data is going, right? Data travels, right?
Data has no borders. You started this podcast saying data has no borders.
Data has no borders, and it travels, right? And it's use a little Google foo sometime. And I mean, if anybody who's worked in this industry probably knows how to run some Boolean searches in Google, just do a Boolean on classified.
Right.
And see what comes up. Make sure you limit it a little bit into some of the domains, because Google will, depending on who your ISP is, they may you may get a cease and desist if you run the right search off Google. But it's amazing what you can find just by doing some simple searches. And I'm not telling you to go out there and download it and disseminate it.
Damn.
Just run a search to see if you don't believe. Right? Run a Boolean search on the word classified and see what comes back. You'd be shocked.
I'm sure.
And Google's only touching
5% of the internet.
5% of the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right?
Imagine doing that in Tor a different way altogether.
Right.
And can you imagine the stuff that you'd find there?
It's scary is the best way to put it, right? Because people don't. I mean, God, the government put how much data out on AWS unsecured that got hit? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I'm not going to say you should operate under the idea that you're going to be breached, but I think you should operate under the idea that you have probably more attack vectors than you realize, and you should be thinking of where my data is and how all the ways it could possibly get hit. It's only impossible until somebody actually takes your data and you're on the news, right?
And you're in every headline.
Yeah. The funniest thing I've ever seen lately in the past few months was the meme that had the pain level of a cybersecurity breach, and it had like the doctor's smiley faces, the frowny faces, 1 through 10, and then it had way out to the right, it had 11, and it had Brian Krebs' face on it. It said Krebs calls. So it was a 1 to 10 pain scale, and then way off to the right on 11 was Krebs calls. Because the last thing you want to do is be on Krebs, that he's the one who called and told you you've been breached.
Right.
Right. That's not where you want to be.
No.
Or you don't want the federal government showing up and telling you that you've been breached.
You don't want to be the city of Atlanta.
Right. And we still haven't seen the fallout of that. I mean,
Well, we've seen the financial fallout of it.
not completely, I don't think. I mean, think about Equifax alone. I mean, the last article I saw was they're bumping 75 million is what it's cost to this point.
I mean, Maersk
and
spent
there's
170 million.
And there's still lawsuits after lawsuit after lawsuit stacked up out there to do that. So
But when you're a multi-billion-dollar company,
right.
again, I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, I did this research about a month ago. So Chase, when they were breached, lost about $3 billion in revenue,
Right.
over 2 years. Maersk, for their breach last year, lost $1.7 billion in revenue, but they're $50 billion companies.
Right. It's a rounding error.
Right.
Right. And unfortunately, that was some of I think the hopes tied to like GDPR is that even before that, if you got caught, the fines were so low that everybody's like, we'll just pay the fines. Even PCI violations for some companies is like, it's cheaper just to pay the fines than it is
to get the technology.
Or to fix the problem. And you can actually probably have, depending on the size of your company and the value you are to MasterCard, Visa, and American Express, you may be able to operate for a period of time with that known issue and just keep paying fines. Because depending on your volume, they may be very apprehensive about shutting off your ability to process credit cards. Until it comes probably a PR nightmare for them. It's they're still
it's a PR nightmare for them anyways.
Anyway, they're in a constant PR nightmare, right? But they're still making money, a lot of money. And let's talk about our friends. Just because it's fresh in everybody's mind, Equifax. Yeah, they lost a little stock value. It's already coming back.
It's back.
Yeah, and it's back to where it is. I mean, you look at enough studies on it that have had some long-term after some of these major breaches for most of the companies, their stock comes back pretty quickly.
Well, the third-party vendor for Target, which is one of the ones you discussed, is they went out of business.
They went out of business because they weren't big enough to handle it. And that's why I think the small retailers, the small vendors, the small shops, number one, they probably outsourced everything. They had somebody come in, set it up for them. It's never been looked at again. Number two is most of the time, as we all know, the average breach has been going on for probably 6+ months before it's identified.
200 days.
Yeah. We've got those small to mid-size that cannot afford, do not have the budget to do what they're doing, to have a robust program, to have people regularly testing it. They lay in wait and collect small amounts of data. And use small amounts of data. And the problem you wind up with there is in aggregate, it's a huge amount of risk to all of us, right? But in reality, if we find out they've been breached and we've lost all our information and they get sued, the first lawsuit, they're out of business and nothing ever else is going to happen, right? It's out there. And it's like the old saying goes, once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet. Well, once your data's on the wherever, it's always there. And we've got to get just better about protecting that data. And I think as an industry, the big guys are very, very important. Us big, that have budget and all that, we got a lot of data in one place. But we also need to figure out a way to help our partners and help them protect these smaller vectors because, like I said, in the aggregate, it's all the data. Right? It's not just big buckets of it. It's all the data spread out, right? And most of your mom and pop shops are not going to realize it's been happening.
Well, first data being that it's, big company here in the state of Georgia, one of the essentially employment leaders in the state as well, and a big company. I mean, we are the fintech capital of the country, not New York, people. Atlanta.
Transaction Alley.
Yeah, Transaction Alley. Exactly. What kind of cooperation do you feel needs to be between enterprise business and federal government on cybersecurity?
So I think there's already a lot, especially in the financial sector.
Right.
Right. You got the FSI SAC. You've got there is a lot of collaboration, I think, that happens between federal government.
In the financial sector.
In the financial
because that
sectors.
protects the finances
Right.
of the government. But
because the government a lot of times is using some of these
Right.
these people to do some of their
well, they have to. They have to use first data to process payments.
Yeah. So I think making it accessible to the smaller people, and I think making sure that data sharing, and that's always been a concern with a lot of cybersecurity people, is data sharing with the federal government. What if we're doing this data sharing and we find something? Are you now going to come after me? So that's always been the fear now is, oh, well, we've been sharing data and...
Doesn't that always depend on the government, though? You're like, what? Okay, this election season, who's it going to be? And we're not going to get political, but it's one of those. Are you going to come after the business, or are you going to help the business?
And I don't think the FTC is the right answer.
Well, they just lost that big lawsuit.
They did, and I'm happy for Michael, even though he went bankrupt and it caused him a lot of issues. But I think he's vindicated because of it. But still, we've got to figure out how to share data with.
And again, Michael was small. This is again one of those things. Again, the FTC picked a fight with a small guy, took him out of business for 10 years now. Yep. He's been fighting this, and he was in our office a few weeks ago, and we were chatting right before it happened, right before the verdict came out. Yeah. And we were chatting about it, and we were, his book is The Devil in the Beltway.
Unfortunately, we need the government to help, but we also don't need them to do certain things.
Right.
I think we as a community, which Atlanta is a really good cybersecurity community.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sharing going on that is not public sharing, right? Most of us down here know each other. Most of us can pick up a phone and call somebody and go, "Hey, are you seeing this kind of activity going on?"
Absolutely.
And we can have those conversations. So from that standpoint, get involved in the community. Get out to these events, get out and network, find these guys who are doing this for a living. If you're doing it for a living too, get together, have conversations,
or listen to our podcast,
or listen to your podcast, right? And no, these
shameless promotion.
Well, no, and these are great. And there's actually your guys, and there's a couple other pretty good ones here in the Atlanta market that are run by some of the CISOs that run big operations here in Atlanta. Right. Get out into the community, get involved, get into ISACA, get into InfoGuard, get into these communities out here that don't cost you really much or anything to be part of, and talk, listen, and listen's probably the number one thing all of us.
2 ears, 1 mouth.
2 ears, 1 mouth. That's right. Listen, understand what's going on, and figure out a way to have the conversation with your business leadership and owners and help them understand why it's important, not why you need it. Why is important
for the business.
Don't go in trying to sell something. And this is a conversation I have with a lot of vendors who call me. Quit trying to sell me something. Understand what my business is. Understand where my problems are. And then let's talk about ways we can solve the problem. Not, I need another toy. But and then as if you're running a program, look at all the tools you have. How about just switching the switch to ON, right? I was at a breakfast with a bunch of senior cyber guys here in town, and a lot of people in town probably know Wolf that works over at who he's published. We were having a conversation about innovation. He goes, "I got a great innovation idea for you. How about we use the tools we've got?" Right? And he's 100% right. Quit buying shelfware. Quit half implementing that technology. If you've got a project, run the project out. Get the product in. Understand how it fixes your issue or how it solves one of your problems that you're trying to, and actually use the product.
Goes back to your point of prioritize. Right. You're going to have 150 different problems in the business, but prioritize what.
You've got to be able to talk to people and say, look, there are certain things on our environment, there are certain data I'm going to treat better than other data.
Right. It's like throwing a rock in a lake, right? You've got all these different layers, but you got to protect that first core.
Right.
Right. Because what is it? 20% of your business drives 80% of your revenue.
Right.
So protect that 20% with everything you've got.
So you've got to be able to have that conversation with people and tell them, look, your stuff in the grand scheme of things and in the priorities of what's going on, yours is not that important.
Right.
And I'm going to spend my effort here. Now, once I get through with the top 5, then I move to the new top 5, which should be 6 through 10. And as I get through a 6 through 10, then I'll worry about 11 through 15, right? So you should be able to sit down and write out all the things you want to do, put them in a priority, and then focus on those. And as I get those wrapped up, I'll move to the next one and have that conversation with the businesses. This is how we're going to approach this. We're going to prioritize. We're going to get our capabilities where they need to be in this area. Then we'll worry about this. And then there should be some stuff, and I heard this at the event CISO Summit that was in town last week. Russell from over at the Federal Reserve, he said, you should have a not-to-do list, right? You really should. He said part of that list should be not to do, that we're just not going to do this stuff.
Because it's just not worth it.
Because it's just not worth it. So,
Ken, we're short on time, and I want to respect yours as well.
Yep.
Thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. So we'll be right back after the message from our sponsor. Thanks for tuning in. This is the CyberHub Engage podcast. The CyberHub Engage podcast is brought to you by CyberHub Summit. CyberHub Summit is hosting its second annual cybersecurity conference in Atlanta, Georgia on October 10th at the City Winery, featuring live cyber war games. Find out more at cyberhubsummit.com. Hey guys, thanks for tuning back. I want to thank Ken for joining us here today at our CyberHub Engage studio, and I want to thank our sponsors for helping us out and making this podcast possible so that you guys can listen to it and bringing these guests in. Again, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter under CyberHub Engage. We'd love to get feedback. If you want to be a guest on the show, write to us. You can also follow me personally on Twitter, James_Azar1. I'm always sharing stuff, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm the host of the CyberHub Engage. Can't miss me, James Azar. Thank you for your support. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with more guests. And happy 4th of July. Thanks for tuning in.